We do not know what led to this crash, but we have some very strong opinions and ideas, and I think we'll probably state those opinions now.
Then proceeds to read a written statement of his opinions. So there was a possibility you weren't going to continue reading your prepared statement of opinions? Stable genius mode activated. His opinions in this briefing revolve around his biggest foe, DEI. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. He prefers uniformity, unfairness, and exclusion. Anyways, let's get to his opinions because that's 99% of what he talks about in this statement. Who cares about facts when you're the president making a statement about a tragic accident where many innocent people lost their lives? His opinions are going to be all about how low hiring standards related to DEI impacted this crash, even though he also says the Black Hawk helicopter pilot was at fault and he wasn't blaming the air traffic controller in this situation. But this is still caused by diversity policies because he has common sense.
We must have only the highest standards for those who work in our aviation system. I changed the Obama standards from very mediocre at best to extraordinary.
Yet President Trump offered nothing to support this claim. What exactly did he change that made the aviation standards better in his first term? FAA diversity practices in hiring people with disabilities, which is what he goes on to harp about in this statement, had the same language about hiring people with disabilities from 2013 to 2021. This is just a normal Trump statement saying he made things go from bad or mediocre to extraordinary without offering any supporting evidence.
Only the highest aptitude, they have to be the highest intellect and psychologically superior people were allowed to qualify for air traffic controllers. That was not so prior to getting there. When I arrived in 2016, I made that change very early on because I always felt this was a job that, and other jobs too, but this was a job that had to be superior intelligence. And
there is nothing to show Trump raised the standard for air traffic controllers after he took office the first time, or that he even changed the standard in any way. There is no evidence that standards for air traffic controllers were ever lowered to accommodate DEI hires.
And Biden took over. He changed them back to lower than ever before.
That familiar ever before rhetoric, though. Really nothing to say here other than it's completely baseless that Biden lowered the standards for air traffic controllers or that he lowered the standard more than ever before.
I put safety first. Obama, Biden, and the Democrats put policy first. And they put politics at a level that nobody's ever seen.
The irony, of course, is that Trump making this false and politically motivated statement is an example of how Trump puts politics at a level no one has ever seen before. As mentioned before, the safety standards have never been lowered in the FAA to make new hires, especially not for critical roles like air traffic controllers, unless you count the Aviation Development Program that allowed 20 people with disabilities to train for careers in air traffic operations that was announced in 2019 while Trump was in office. As has always been the practice, the same standards for aptitude, medical, and security clearance was required by the FAA. While the FAA has encouraged people with disabilities to apply for jobs, it was never their practice to give applicants jobs they were not able to do. If things were always fluctuating, why hasn't there been a noticeable amount of errors and crashes at various times when standards were supposedly significantly and horribly dropped? We just haven't seen that.
I signed something last week that was an executive order, very powerful, on restoring the highest standards of air traffic controllers.
The executive order mentioned was not about air traffic controllers. It was generally about stopping DEI hiring practices.
I do want to point out that various articles that appeared prior to my entering office, and here's one. The FAA's diversity push includes focus on hiring people with severe intellectual and psychiatric disabilities. That is amazing.
It's amazing because he read that in an article somewhere. Trump gets a lot of his best insights from random articles that misstate facts to promote a political agenda, in this case the anti-DEI agenda. Since the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the federal government has tried to hire qualified people with disabilities. Incidentally, the FAA's Aviation Safety Workforce Plan for 2020 to 2029 came about under Trump's prior term in office. It said in 2020 they would continue to promote and support the hiring of people with disabilities and targeted disabilities. Federal policies about hiring people with disabilities never stated they would hire them for jobs they aren't otherwise suited for. The whole point is to hire people with disabilities for jobs they are suited for, and for the disabilities not to be used to discriminate against them for jobs they are suited for.
They can be air traffic controllers. I don't think so.
There are specific requirements and criteria for air traffic controller positions. There is no policy that waives those requirements or abandons criteria just to hire people with disabilities for those positions. For a person who claims to have common sense, wouldn't common sense tell you that there would be a major legal liability that no administration would ever want to be tied to if they just let random, unqualified, unsuited people to be air traffic controllers? We just have never seen that. We also haven't noticed drastic changes in air safety outcomes from administration to administration because things have been pretty uniform from a safety perspective. Let's now hear the President of the United States read from another random politically motivated article.
The FAA is actively recruiting workers who suffer severe intellectual disabilities, psychiatric problems, and other mental and physical conditions under a diversity and inclusion hiring initiative spelled out on the agency's website. Can you imagine?
Can you also imagine the agency's website had the same language during Trump's first term? It had the same policy. The safety plan issued in Trump's first presidency called for the same hiring practices. So Trump radically changed standards under his first term, except they were actually the same. And he's shocked about practices that were in place during his first term.
A group within the FAA, another story, determined that the workforce was too white, that they had concerted efforts to get the administration to change that and to change it immediately. This was in the Obama administration just prior to my getting there. And we took care of African Americans, Hispanic Americans. We took care of everybody at levels that nobody's ever seen before. It's one of the reasons I won. But they actually came out with a directive, too white.
Surprise, surprise, there was no directive that said too white. Trump's article, written from a right-wing political point of view, interprets diversity and inclusion hiring to mean things are too white, which I suppose is one way to look at it if you're so inclined, but we're also talking about initiatives to hire more women and disabled people. So are there no white women or white disabled people? Also, as an example, before Obama's diversity and inclusion initiative, FAA black new hires in 2012 were at 10%, and at the end of his presidency in 2016, after the hiring initiatives had been in place for a few years, new black hires were slightly above 13%, which was proportional to the overall black population. That doesn't sound inherently unfair. The crazy part about all this is that none of this has been found to be related to or the cause of the tragic incident in DC. But I guess any tragedy is a good opportunity for President Trump to read the findings of some right-wing articles to reporters that capture the essence of where he gets his common sense.